Look at a map of the world from 1500, then 1800, then 1950, then today. Notice something? The superpowers keep changing. Not slowly, suddenly, catastrophically, permanently. In the last 600 years, we've watched the same movie play out 4 times. 4 different empires, 4 different centuries, 4 complete collapses. And here's the unsettling part. They didn't fall randomly. They followed remarkably similar sequences. Stage by stage, decision by decision. Like they were all reading from the same playbook on how to self-destruct. The Dutch Empire controlled global trade in the 1600s. Gone. The French Empire dominated Europe in the 1700s. Gone. The Ottoman Empire lasted 600 years. Gone. The British Empire covered a quarter of the earth. Gone. And every single one of them thought they were different. Thought they'd found the secret to permanent power. Thought the rules didn't apply to them. They were wrong every time. Right now, in 2025, the United States appears to be at stage 5 of this 7-stage pattern. We're not heading toward it. We're not flirting with it. By most historical definitions, we're living it. And if you understand the pattern, you can see the direction this is heading. This isn't about politics. This isn't about left or right. This is about economics, historical patterns, and the brutal logic of how empires decline. Let me show you the pattern. Then you decide if we're really different this time. Before we go through the stages, you need to understand what we mean by collapse, because empires don't fall like dominoes. They fall like buildings with termite damage. Everything looks fine on the surface. Then one day, the whole structure comes down in hours. Imperial collapse happens in 3 phases. Phase 1, the invisible crack. The empire is still powerful, still winning wars, still growing. But beneath the surface, something fundamental breaks. Usually, it's economic. The empire starts consuming more than it produces, starts borrowing more than it earns, starts making promises it cannot keep. Nobody notices because the symptoms haven't appeared yet. The currency still works. The military still dominates. The government still functions. But the foundation is already damaged. Phase 2, the acceleration. This is where everything starts moving faster than anyone expected. Allies begin questioning their loyalty. Enemies start testing boundaries. The reserve currency status erodes. Trade partners develop alternatives. What made you powerful becomes what makes you vulnerable. Your global military presence becomes unsustainable. Your currency, once demanded by everyone, starts flooding back home. Your promises, once guaranteed by strength, become empty words. Phase 3, the cascade. This is the collapse itself, not gradual decline over generations, sudden implosion over years or even months. A currency crisis triggers a debt crisis. The debt crisis triggers a political crisis. The political crisis triggers a legitimacy crisis. And suddenly, the superpower that seemed eternal last decade is a case study in a textbook this decade. This happened to the Netherlands in the 1700s, France in the 1800s, the Ottomans in the 1900s, Britain in the 1900s. Each time people said, but this is different, this empire is special. They were wrong. And we need to understand why. Every empire's collapse begins the same way, with success. Massive, intoxicating, dangerous success. Let's look at the Dutch Republic in the 1600s. They weren't even a country, just 7 provinces that rebelled against Spain. Within 50 years, they became the richest territory on earth. How? They dominated global trade. The Dutch East India Company was the world's first megacorporation. They controlled the spice trade, the shipping lanes, the financial markets. Amsterdam became the center of world commerce. Dutch bankers financed everyone. The guilder was the currency everyone wanted. Success created a trap. When you're the richest country in the world, why would you manufacture goods? Just buy them from somewhere cheaper. Why invest in farming? Just import food. Why build ships when you can hire them? Why innovate when you can purchase? This is stage 1, the productive decline. The Dutch stopped making things. They became middlemen, financiers, traders. All the wealth flowing through Amsterdam enriched the merchants, but the productive base of the economy shrank. By 1700, the Netherlands was importing almost everything. Food, manufactured goods, even military equipment. They had the money to pay for it, so nobody worried. But here's the problem. When you stop producing, you become dependent. And dependency is fragility. Here's the shock. The Dutch didn't collapse because they ran out of money. They collapsed because money stopped mattering when they couldn't make anything. The Dutch got rich from trade. When the British Navy became more powerful, when trade routes shifted, when wars disrupted commerce, the Dutch had nothing to fall back on. Their wealth evaporated because it was never really theirs. It was just flowing through. France fell into the same trap in the 1700s. They became obsessed with luxury, with consumption, with importing the finest goods from across the world. French aristocrats spent fortunes on parties while French manufacturing stagnated. The Ottoman Empire, once the workshop of the Mediterranean, stopped producing innovative goods by the 1800s. They imported European weapons, European textiles, European technology. The empire that once led the world in engineering became a customer of European ingenuity. Britain avoided this trap longer than most, but even they eventually succumbed. By the 1960s, British manufacturing was collapsing. They were living off financial services and past glory. The pattern is always the same. Success breeds complacency. Complacency breeds dependency. Dependency breeds fragility. And here's the critical question. Does this sound familiar? The United States doesn't manufacture much anymore. We design products, we finance them, we market them, but we don't make them. Our factories are in China, Vietnam, Mexico, Bangladesh. We import $3 trillion in goods annually and export $2 trillion. That's a $1 trillion deficit every year. We're consuming more than we produce, just like the Dutch, just like the French, just like the Ottomans, just like the British. We tell ourselves it's fine because we're a service economy now, because we innovate, because we have technology. That's exactly what they all said, right up until the money stopped flowing. By historical standards, stage 1 appears complete. Success in stage 1 creates a problem. You now have wealth worth protecting, and threats everywhere that want it. This leads to stage 2, military overextension. The Ottoman Empire at its peak controlled 3 continents. They had to defend Hungary, the Balkans, the Middle East, North Africa, the Arabian Peninsula, all simultaneously. By the 1600s, they were fighting Persia in the east, Austria in the north, Venice in the Mediterranean, Portugal in the Indian Ocean. The cost was astronomical. At one point, 60% of Ottoman revenue went to the military. They built the largest standing army in the world. They had the best artillery, the most advanced fortifications, the strongest navy, and it bankrupted them. Because here's the math. If you're defending everywhere, you're defending nowhere. If you're fighting on multiple fronts, you're stretched thin everywhere. If you're spending 60% of your budget on the military, you're starving everything else. The Ottoman military looked impressive on paper, but they couldn't modernize because they had no money left. They couldn't invest in new technology because they were maintaining old commitments. They couldn't reform because the military consumed everything. France learned this lesson in the 1700s. They fought the War of Spanish Succession, the War of Austrian Succession, the 7 Years' War, the American Revolution. Wars everywhere, all the time. King Louis XIV built the most powerful army in Europe, and it destroyed France's finances. By the time the French Revolution started, half the government's budget was going to pay interest on war debt. Not the military itself, just the interest on loans taken to pay for past wars. Britain repeated the pattern in the 1900s. They had to defend India, defend the Suez Canal, defend the Mediterranean, defend Southeast Asia, defend Africa, defend the Caribbean. World War I cost them $35 billion. World War II cost another $120 billion. They won both wars and lost the empire anyway because the cost of winning bankrupted them. The pattern repeats. Military dominance becomes military overextension. Overextension becomes financial exhaustion. Exhaustion becomes vulnerability. Now look at America. We have over 750 military bases in 80 countries. We have troops deployed in 150 nations. We're committed to defending NATO, Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, Israel, Taiwan. We're countering Russia in Europe, China in the Pacific, Iran in the Middle East. Our military budget is $850 billion annually. That's more than the next 9 countries combined. And military analysts argue it's still not enough. We can't recruit enough soldiers. We can't maintain our equipment. We can't afford the weapon systems we've promised. We're retiring ships faster than we're building them. Our Air Force has the oldest aircraft fleet in history, and we have commitments we arguably cannot fulfill simultaneously. If China invades Taiwan while Russia attacks NATO, while Iran closes the Strait of Hormuz, we cannot respond to all 3 at once. Physically impossible. We're overextended. Just like the Ottomans, just like the French, just like the British. And just like them, we're telling ourselves we have to maintain all these commitments, that we have no choice, that this is what superpower status requires. That's what they all said, right before they collapsed. By most military metrics, stage 2 appears complete. If you think this sounds exaggerated, consider this. Every empire in history thought collapse looked dramatic. Invasions, revolutions, apocalyptic endings. It never does. Routine choices made by reasonable people trying to solve immediate problems. And then one day, you wake up and the empire is gone. That's what makes the pattern so dangerous. It doesn't announce itself, it just happens. Let's continue. Military overextension creates a financing problem. You're spending more than you're earning. You're making promises you can't keep. You have 2 choices, raise taxes or print money. Raising taxes is politically difficult. Printing money is politically easy. This is stage 3, currency debasement. In the 1500s, the Ottoman Empire faced a crisis, wars with Persia, wars with Austria, rebellions in the provinces. They needed money desperately. The Ottoman akçe was a silver coin, so they started adding copper. A little at first, then more. By 1600, coins that were supposed to be pure silver were 50% copper. By 1640, they were 80% copper. The face value stayed the same, but the real value plummeted. Merchants stopped accepting the coins at face value. Soldiers refused to be paid in them. Inflation exploded. And within a generation, the Ottoman currency collapsed. Trade shifted to European currencies. The empire's economic sovereignty died. France did the same thing in the 1700s. They couldn't raise enough taxes to pay for wars, so they issued paper money. The first time was in 1716 with John Law's Mississippi Company scheme. They printed money backed by the promise of future wealth from Louisiana. It was a disaster. Hyperinflation, currency collapse, total wipeout. They did it again during the Revolution with the assignat. Printed unlimited paper money backed by confiscated church land. Same result. Hyperinflation, worthless currency, economic chaos. France didn't collapse because people were angry. People were angry because France collapsed. Britain debased the pound repeatedly, went off the gold standard in 1931, devalued in 1949, floated the currency in 1971. Each time the pound lost value. In 1940, 1 pound equaled 4.03. Today it's 1.27. The British pound went from the global reserve currency to a regional currency in one lifetime. The pattern is consistent. Empires facing financial pressure debase their currency. Debasement destroys trust. Lost trust destroys the currency's value. Currency collapse destroys economic power. Now look at America. In 1971, Nixon closed the gold window. The dollar became pure fiat currency, backed by nothing except trust in the U.S. government. Since then, we've printed relentlessly. The money supply has increased 2,000% since 1971. In 2008, we printed $3.5 trillion for quantitative easing. In 2020, we printed another $6 trillion for COVID relief. The dollar has lost 98% of its purchasing power since 1971. What cost $1 in 1971 costs $7 today. That's comparable to the currency debasement that preceded the French Revolution. We're not mixing copper into silver coins. The mechanism is different. The result is arguably the same. We're debasing the currency to finance government spending. And just like the Ottomans, just like the French, just like the British, we're telling ourselves this time is different, that we control the global reserve currency, that everyone needs dollars, that we can print without consequences. That's what they all believed, right up until nobody wanted their currency anymore. By monetary standards, stage 3 appears complete. Currency debasement buys time, but it doesn't solve the underlying problem. You're still spending more than you earn, so you borrow and borrow and borrow. This is stage 4, the debt trap. France in the 1780s borrowed from everyone. Dutch bankers, Swiss bankers, anyone with money. By 1788, half the French government's budget went to paying interest on debt, not paying down the debt, just servicing it. They couldn't reduce spending because the military needed funding. They couldn't raise taxes because the population was already at the breaking point. They couldn't grow the economy because the productive base had collapsed. They were trapped. The only solution was to borrow more to pay the interest on previous borrowing. That's not a solution. That's a countdown to explosion. The explosion came in 1789. The French Revolution started as a debt crisis. The Ottomans followed the same path. By the 1800s, they owed enormous sums to European banks. They defaulted in 1875, had to accept European financial oversight, lost economic sovereignty. By 1881, 30% of Ottoman government revenue went directly to European creditors. They weren't governing their own country anymore. Their creditors were. Britain borrowed massively for both world wars. By 1945, they owed the United States more than their entire GDP. They didn't finish paying off World War II debt until 2006, 61 years of debt servitude. The debt destroyed their ability to maintain the empire. They couldn't afford to defend India, so they left. Couldn't afford Africa, so they left. Couldn't afford the Middle East, so they left. The British Empire didn't fall to invasion, it fell to insolvency. The pattern is inevitable. Borrowing to cover deficits becomes borrowing to pay interest. Borrowing to pay interest becomes unsustainable. Unsustainable debt becomes default or collapse. Now look at America. We owe $36 trillion. That's 124% of GDP. Higher than Britain after World War II. Higher than France before the Revolution. We add another trillion in debt every 100 days. Interest payments on the debt are now over $1 trillion per year. We're spending more on interest than on national defense, more than on all of education, more than on infrastructure. And we're running deficits every single year. $1.8 trillion in 2024, during peacetime, during economic growth. We're borrowing to pay for current spending. Within the next few years, we'll be borrowing to pay interest on previous borrowing. We're already close. When that happens, the debt becomes a spiral. You can't tax enough to pay it. You can't grow fast enough to outrun it. You can't cut enough to balance it. You're trapped, just like France in 1789, just like the Ottomans in 1875, just like Britain in 1945. Now, some argue America is different because we issue the world's reserve currency. We can print our way out. But here's the problem. Britain had the reserve currency too. The pound sterling was the global currency for a century. And it didn't save them. It just delayed the inevitable and made the collapse more painful when it came. Reserve currency status isn't a superpower. It's a loan extension, and every loan comes due eventually. By fiscal measures, stage 4 appears complete. When an empire's economy fails, society fractures. This is stage 5, internal disintegration. The Ottoman Empire, in its final decades, was chaos. Ethnic groups fighting each other, regions declaring independence, corruption everywhere, the best educated citizens emigrating to Europe. The government couldn't provide services, couldn't maintain order, couldn't command legitimacy. By 1900, over 40% of the empire's educated professionals had left for Europe. Brain drain on a catastrophic scale. France, before the revolution, was tearing apart. The aristocracy lived in luxury while peasants starved. Regional conflicts erupted. Trust in institutions collapsed. When the crisis came, there was no unity to respond with. The French monarchy's approval rating in 1788 was estimated at under 15%. Sound familiar? Britain in the 1960s and 70s saw industrial strikes, political extremism, Northern Ireland violence, economic stagnation. The social cohesion that won 2 world wars had evaporated. The pattern is predictable. Economic failure destroys the social contract. The social contract's destruction fractures society. Fractured societies cannot respond to crises. Now look at America. Trust in institutions is at record lows. Congress has a 20% approval rating. Trust in media is at 32%. Trust in the presidency, regardless of who holds it, hovers around 38%. Courts, police, corporations, all collapsing. Political polarization is total. We can't agree on basic facts, much less solutions. Half the country thinks the other half is destroying America. Both halves might be right. Drug overdoses kill 100,000 Americans annually. That's more than car accidents and gun deaths combined. Homelessness is exploding in major cities. Violent crime rates are rising in major metropolitan areas. Life expectancy fell for 2 consecutive years, something that hasn't happened since World War I. Fertility rates have collapsed to 1.6 children per woman. We're not replacing ourselves. The population is only growing due to immigration, and even that's becoming politically toxic. The best and brightest are increasingly checking out. Tech workers moving to Dubai, finance professionals going to Singapore, entrepreneurs exploring residency in Portugal, Malta, anywhere with lower taxes and less dysfunction. We can't build infrastructure anymore. California's high-speed rail project, announced in 2008, has spent $10 billion and laid 119 miles of track. Zero operational. Can't fix the power grid. Can't build housing where people want to live. Can't solve homelessness. Can't stop the opioid crisis. Can't agree on anything. This is what stage 5 looks like. Not external defeat, internal dissolution. And just like the Ottomans, just like France, just like Britain, we're telling ourselves it's temporary, that we'll come together when we need to, that this is just politics as usual. They said the same thing. They were wrong. By social cohesion metrics, stage 5 appears to be underway. We haven't reached stage 6 yet, but we can see it forming on the horizon. Stage 6, loss of reserve currency status. This is when the rest of the world stops needing your currency, when trade shifts to alternatives, when central banks diversify away from your bonds, when your currency comes flooding back home because nobody wants to hold it anymore. Let me be clear, reserve currency loss doesn't mean collapse tomorrow. It means loss of control, loss of the ability to print your way out of problems, loss of the exorbitant privilege that's kept America afloat for 80 years. We're seeing the early signs. China and Russia are trading in yuan and rubles. BRICS nations are actively developing payment alternatives. Saudi Arabia is accepting yuan for oil sales. Central banks are buying gold at the highest rates in 50 years. The dollar's share of global reserves has dropped from 73% in 2001 to 58% today. That's a 15 percentage point decline in just over 20 years. It hasn't happened yet, but the foundation is cracking. When it does happen, history shows it happens fast. Britain lost reserve currency status between 1945 and 1956, 11 years from dominant to irrelevant. The consequences are catastrophic. All those dollars the world is holding, they come back home. That's inflation on a scale we've never seen. The trade deficit becomes unsustainable overnight. Imports become unaffordable. The standard of living collapses. Your military, spread across the world, becomes impossible to fund. Your debts, denominated in your own currency, become impossible to service. Your government, dependent on foreign buyers of bonds, loses the ability to borrow. Stage 7. Rapid collapse. This is the final stage, not gradual decline, sudden implosion. The Soviet Union went from superpower to non-existent in less than 3 years. The Berlin Wall fell in November 1989. The USSR ceased to exist in December 1991. No invasion, no war, just economic collapse. The Soviet military had 30,000 nuclear weapons. They had the largest army on Earth. They had client states on every continent. And it didn't matter. When the economy imploded, everything else followed in months. When reserve currency status goes, when debt becomes unpayable, when the military can't be funded, empires don't fade away gracefully. They collapse quickly. One crisis triggers another. Currency crisis triggers, debt crisis triggers, political crisis triggers, legitimacy crisis. Within years, sometimes months, the superpower becomes history. 4 empires, 4 different centuries, the same 7 stages every time. The Dutch Republic, the French Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the British Empire. Each thought they were exceptional. Each thought they'd broken the pattern. Each thought the rules didn't apply to them. They were wrong every single time. America appears to be at stage 5. By most historical definitions, we've moved through the first 5 stages of the pattern. Productive decline, military overextension, currency debasement, debt trap, social fracture. Stages 6 and 7 are visible on the horizon. Maybe we'll find a way out. Maybe we'll reform before it's too late. Maybe we'll do what no empire has done before, recognize the pattern and change course. History is full of nations that faced crisis and reformed. Switzerland, Singapore, post-war Germany. It's possible. But the pattern suggests otherwise. The math suggests otherwise. And history, which has watched empires die the same way repeatedly, suggests we're about to learn why the sequence repeats. Not because Americans are stupid, not because we're evil, because we're human. And humans, when given power, consistently make the same mistakes. Empires don't collapse because they ignore warnings. They collapse because warnings sound too familiar to take seriously. The pattern doesn't lie, and right now we're following it with remarkable precision. If you want to understand what comes next, subscribe, because when stages 6 and 7 arrive, you'll want to know what happened and why. The future isn't hidden. It's already written in the ashes of empires past.